I really wonder whether the college itself as a total community is really attempting to grapple with the larger issues of what does it mean to establish an alternate culture. Perhaps that's a better way of putting it.
I feel that I'm part of the alternative culture and I feel comfortable here. I don't know how much of a reflection that is. I think that in this building you probably get a cross-section of what the alternative culture really is, from totally apolitical people whose concept of alternative culture is smoking dope and listening to records for the rest of their life, to people who are very politically involved. Plus, all kinds of people in the middle, people who feel that, there are small things that they can do, to people who are spending all of their time trying to change things.
What do you feel about dope? Do you smoke it yourself, or, well...
I've been known to.
What do you think of, I was more interested really in what you thought of dealing in the building.
Oh.
What do you think of dealers? Good people, bad people?
Well, ambivalent feelings, depending on the individual himself, I think. I'm still not particularly in favor of people who are doing it solely to make a lot of money and then leave. I can go along pretty much with the ideas that Rochdale originally had, that since dope has always been considered part of the counterculture, then it should certainly be available to the people who live here. But
do you feel it's hurt Rochdale's involvement, the people that have dealt here? Do you think that's hurt Rochdale's
Yeah, it's hurt Rochdale a lot because there have been a lot of big dealers who have chosen to live here because they knew that they wouldn't be nestled, but have been more concerned with selling to people from Scarborough, and that's what's hurt Rochdale.
I suppose that this picture is most reflective of the Rochdale bogeyman, one of the main factors that led to, one, public indignation over the existence of the place, two, its final foreclosure, and the methods employed to bring about that foreclosure, which is dealing soft drugs. You could spend an awful lot of time apologizing for, explaining, defending the notion of soft drug consumption. I don't know where to begin, except that Rochdale was very much a part of the late 1960s. The energy, the attitudes that typified that period. And one of the things were drugs, all sorts of drugs. It was somewhat like a frontier town in that there were no preconceptions in the beginning. There were no rules. People would just get together in this meeting place and decide through experience how they were going to live. So that you'd have marijuana, hashish, all the psychedelics introduced. You'd also have speed. And to a very, very small extent, there would be some junk intrusions. Now, very quickly, people who lived there discovered that there were certain drugs that, one, people couldn't handle, and two, the community couldn't handle. So that although everything may have been tried at one point, very quickly, within a few months, it was decided that speed was verboten, junk was verboten, any injectables were verboten. Not so much for moral reasons, but simply because of what they did to the people who took them, and what they did to the community, the kind of vibes that they gave off, the kind of vibes that they attracted. But marijuana, hashish, and the psychedelics fit in just ever so perfectly. Now, to accept the goodness of soft drugs was also to accept the necessity for the distribution. It seems somehow hypocritical to say, oh yeah, well there's nothing wrong with marijuana and hashish, and God, I love it, but you can't deal it. So we dealt it. A lot of us at one time. I think everybody got into it at one point or another. And there was another factor, that the people who were attracted to Rochdale after a while were street people. And a lot of them had a fairly strong notion of what they didn't want, but no solid notion of what they did want. They were, in many cases, unemployed, and in some cases, I suspect, unemployable. So that dealing was the one way that they could do something and make a buck. A lot of people were supported by dealing in Rochdale and in the community around Rochdale, and an awful lot of people obtained their smoke directly through Rochdale. It was a good thing, but as I said before, it's probably the one largest thing that resulted in the great, great, great pressure and the great, great misunderstanding between us and the community at large. I think realistically that we could have renegotiated our mortgage if we had made a promise to Ottawa that all dealing would be outlawed, stamped out completely, to take some of the heat off of them. But we just decided that it would be incompatible with whatever loose community ideology we developed over the last few years. So the police would raid us quite often.
But it's really, really difficult to get Rochdale to hate, because we can absorb almost any kind of punishment except really long and protracted attacks in our community. And I think that sort of thing was manifest best by the confetti philosophy. In 1970, when Ottawa had finally come to the conclusion that something must be done, they were doing, our president at the time, a guy named Peter Turner, was a fine, intelligent fellow, didn't smoke dope and worked his ass off, was trying to get us refinanced. And various members of the city hierarchy who'd made political hay on Rochdale's account were anxious that we not be refinanced. So they would do things like have all 15 or 20 police raids in the course of a month. And they were desperately trying to provoke a riot or altercation of some sort, because then they could write it up in the press as a riot. Like most of our riots at Rochdale invariably involved, a couple of beer bottles at best, or worst, as the case may be. So, at the height of this, the governing council and a couple of members of the community figured that we had to diffuse this incredibly high-tension circumstance. So we issued to the security force bags of confetti and streamers. And we had these 2-foot-high red letters over the front door that said, "Welcome 52 Division." And we had this cake in the front lobby. Great, huge mothering cake. They said, "Happy Bus Day" on it. And when the police would come, the fire alarms would go, and instead of an angry, surly, rock and bottle throwing mob, which is something the police, if they couldn't deal with, at least they could relate to. Like they understand violence. They're really good at it. They've been at it for years. It's the way they think. And if you send a herd of hippies down to fight it out with the police will win. They couldn't cope with these dozens of drunken hippies and stoned hippies running around throwing confetti at them. This does not compute. This is one of our security guards, a guy who was about 6'6", and mean and extremely effective during the course of one of the raids. You want to take that down, Will? This is the morality squad taking some Rochdale stalwarts away out of a gas station. out by the gas station in the east end of the building. And this is that same night. This guy here with the bag of confetti was the head of security at the time. This fellow was to become the president of the college in the future. And it was a party. And we eventually stopped the police raids doing that because they couldn't cope with it. You know, reporters were showing up and seeing this party going on during the middle of a raid and writing silly stories in the paper, and it really looked weird. And that was accentuated by the fact that Rochdale, the drug dealing capital of the Western Hemisphere, you could send 50, 60, 70 policemen in there, come out with 2 ounces of pot, a joint, and a couple of arrests.